I remember how this all started. Huge balls of light and darkness mixed together. No one knew what they were as they sat there on the surface of the planet. That was until they started coming. We had believed these things to be only myths. At first, we only watched as creatures such as elves, dwarves, centaurs, and hundreds of different mythical creatures came to our world. It wasn't long, though, before we found ourselves in the middle of a war. A war that changed our history forever. We fought against the onslaught of these creatures. Our weapons worked. Sometimes. The small caliber of our weapons worked against us. As our cities began to fall, the fighting kept getting closer and closer. Our great weapons of war were the only thing that stopped the advance. Though humanity itself broke apart, small towns and villages still survived, not a threat to anyone. Combine beasts and creatures with only the desire to destroy, fight against the remnants of the human population. Now the fight has pushed into enemy territory where humans are attempting to retake their land. A squad of soldiers creeps through the woods. Battle-weary and tired, they find a camp. The one in command motions for others to search the area. Without warning, they're attacked by a group of green monsters. No reason to play it quiet. Yelling to the soldiers to get in position and try to fight off the horde of monsters that are coming at them. These monsters can think, but their culture is very elemental. They are large and muscular, but their weapons of choice are clubs and occasional axes. The human's primary weapon is a firearm, ranging in sizes from heavy machine guns to small pistols. As they begin to push the monsters back, they get hit from two sides. Losing a few men in the melee, the monsters are driven back. While checking on the men, one of the younger soldiers sees something in the bushes. He moves the bushes aside to find a couple of elf children cowering in the crevice of a tree. "Sergeant!" he yells. The team leader and squad leader both walk over. One of them says, "What'd you find?" Says, I don't know. The team leader pulls up his weapon and aims it at the elf children. "I don't see anything." As he goes to fire, the squad leader grabs the barrel and raises it high into the air, firing 2 shots into the trees. He looks his team leader in the eye and says, "I do. Let's go." He turns to leave and yells out to his men, "Grab the tags and get Rod on his feet. We're moving out." The team leader is clearly upset, and the children run into the forest as the soldiers walk away. Later, after returning from the patrol, they see the injured soldier being taken away on a litter. One of the officers walks up and addresses the squad leader. "Sergeant, get your ass into the CO's office right fucking now." Squad leader turns to one of his soldiers. "Refit and chow. I'll be back soon." And with that, he's off. When he gets to the CO's office, he is thoroughly chewed out by the commanding officer, the first sergeant, and the sergeant major. The first sergeant yells, "Sergeant, we have been informed that you ordered your men to stand down in the face of the enemy. Is that true?" The NCO replies, "No, sir, that is not true." Again, the first sergeant says, "Then how do you explain letting a couple of elves go when your orders were to eliminate them on sight, even going as far as to physically stopping one of your men?" The NCO looks the first sergeant in the eye. "With all due respect, first sergeant, they are my men. As far as the incident goes, there was no enemy left." The first sergeant, "Then what do you call those elves?" "Children, first sergeant." The sergeant major comes in. "Those so-called children will grow up to kill hundreds of us. Are you going to explain to the families of those soldiers that their loved one died because you felt sorry for their killers?" The NCO, "Sergeant Major, it is my duty to protect the people. It is also my duty to lead my men beyond the borders and hunt down anything that poses a threat to our people. However, It is not my duty to kill the innocent, nor did I ever raise my hand to sell my soul to you or anyone else. The first sergeant cuts in. You're a leader, but I cannot see any reason why we should send you out again if you are not willing to shoot the enemy. The sergeant major, he's right. We cannot have leaders on the front lines that are not willing to shoot the enemy. You have only one chance to explain why you ordered your men to stand down. The NCO says, Sergeant Major, they were not the enemy. They were just children. The commanding officer chimes in. That is no excuse. You have a duty to kill anything that does not belong on this planet. You failed, even with over 24 enemy kills. The NCO, if you feel that way, sir, then perhaps you should lead the next foot patrol into enemy territory. Sergeant Major, don't you talk to me like that, Sergeant. You will follow orders or I will have you hung. The NCO thinks for a moment. There is no martial law here. You don't have the authority, Sergeant Major. You could bust me down, transfer me, or even chapter me out, but you cannot have me killed for having an opinion. The first sergeant chimes in. We are at war, which means we can. The NCO says, doing what you're told under penalty of death sounds a lot like slavery to me. The sergeant major, that's it, walks forward and rips off the sergeant rank. You will receive official word about this later. He turns towards the door and yells to the sentries outside, get this man to the brig right fucking now. The sergeant, shaking off the securities that grabbed him, I'll walk myself. The sergeant looks into the sergeant major's eyes and then silent officer behind the desk. The CO doesn't even look him in the eye before he turns to walk away. A few days later, the sergeant is awaiting execution. He is shown in front of everyone as he waits in a cage next to the gallows. As he has walked to the rope, he can smell something in the air. Something that makes him grin a little bit. As the rope is placed around his neck, he hears the hangman say, now for the condemned to give his final words. The NCO raises his head up high and puts his shoulders back. This is the fate that awaits us all. Those in power want you to fear them more than the hordes of monsters that plague our world. There is more than one way. There is more than just death. The hangman walks over and gives his final check. As he walks back, stones and cannonballs begin to rain down from above. The gallows, being struck by these objects, begin to fall over as it breaks and falls to the ground. The crowd scatters, and within a minute, the well-aimed shots knock down the surrounding wall and end up in the courtyard. As a different group of monsters begin to rush in, they are met with machine guns. The next volley of cannons is well-aimed and takes out several human positions. As mortars are dialed in, monsters try for one big push. As positions begin to overrun, others abandon their posts with the fear they will be slaughtered. The sergeant runs in one of the abandoned position and fires a heavy machine gun and is able to halt the enemy advance. As the enemy withdraws, the sergeant is left in the courtyard holding this heavy machine gun. He looks over and sees the people staring at him. He looks up to the area where he thinks the leaders are at. He reaches inside his shirt, rips off his dog tags. Dropping them at his feet, he leaves, grabbing a few items before he disappears from sight. Running through the woods of the forest, he keeps going until he just can't run anymore, taking only short breaks to keep him going for days as he gets further and further from the people and place he calls home. It isn't until he comes across a village that he believes he may have gone far enough, though when he enters, people shun him away as he is forced out by the local population. He keeps going for almost a week and finally finds the remnants of a town. Rummaging through the town, he finds out that most of the tools are still intact. He takes what he needs and starts to build just inside the tree line. He builds a house near a river with access to the fields. He takes only what he needs to survive, but soon realizes he is not alone. On several occasions, he has to dodge patrols from all different types of creatures. He has to hide his food and keep his home, as well as keep himself camouflaged. For over a year, he keeps this up. With the amount of monsters running around the forest, it is left barren of anything he can hunt. This forces him to take drastic measures. Some of the monsters turn out to be rather tasty, though he has to be very careful not to leave a trail back to his home. While gathering some of the berries that are in season, he hears the sounds of battle. Scurrying through the woods, he searches for said battle. When he finds it, there is a three-way fight. Massive cloaked figures attack human soldiers that are defending themselves against a group of elves. The lines begin to disappear as it becomes a straight melee. As things begin to slow, the human soldiers were barely hanging on. The elves were down to one female, and the cloaked beings seemed to be winning. Humans fought until the end. The elf female took out several of the cloaked beings, but was injured before she could finish the last one. When the cloaked being moved in to finish her, the man struck. Firing his sidearm, the cloaked being flinched and then lunged at him. The sounds of the bullets ricocheting off the metal is the only sound he hears. The man ducked and rolled and dodged the horizontal strike that was coming for his head, then sticks his pistol up into the being's groin. Firing vertically, the bullet went through the being's head. He stood for a moment and fell over. After hearing bink, as the being fell, the man removed his head that was now covered in a black and dark red ooze that seemed to be too thick for blood. The man walked over to the elf female, the only one alive. She looked up at him and the weapon in his hand. That's when a bunch of goblins showed up. Frickin' scavengers. The man wasted no time in unloading his weapon into the group. Seeing each other fall was enough to make the goblins withdraw in a hurry. Again, he walked over the female, as she seems to have trouble staying conscious. She tries to use her magic, but she's already weak and passes out. Rigging up a small litter, he loads her and all the equipment he can. When she wakes up, she is in his bed with her wounds bandaged. She reaches for her weapon, but finds it hard to move. She is alone, and she begins to move around. Her dressing is neatly made, but her long black hair isn't. She fills the basin next to her bed and finds that her hairbrush is next to it. She brushes out her hair as she slowly moves around. The building is well constructed, with several rooms, most of which are built right into the side of a hill. The front is an adaptation of an A-frame, with a few windows to allow light. Snooping around, she finds a rather large food storage for just one person. Only room has a fireplace. Altogether a very well thought out design. Then she hears a voice. Did you get a good look around? She spins around to find a man that has saved her, standing in the doorway. You shouldn't be moving around yet, he says. She asks, why not? Well, first off, you're bleeding. She looks down to see that the blood was actually soaking through the bandages. The man motions to the table. Sit down. They need to be replaced. Hesitantly, she sits down and is surprised at the fact that the man is being so careful. She places her arm up so that he can wrap her wrist and torso. She examines him and his worn clothes and boots. It's obvious he hasn't had a shave in several months. His tattered hair is halfway down his neck, and his hands tell her that he has worked constantly for a long time. The man states, you should be resting until this heals more. The elf inquires, why are you helping me? Your people have been trying to kill us since we came to this strange land. Without even looking up, the man says, first off, this strange land is my home. Secondly, I have never fired on an elf, at least not one that wasn't trying to kill me first. Thirdly, you did not attack the humans when those things were trying to kill them. The elf says, those things were trying to kill us too. I see, he says, as he finishes and puts the medical supplies away. He gets her a glass of water and a snack. You should eat something. She takes it, and he leaves again. She is left there thinking as she looks at her bandages, wondering what this human might be up to. She doesn't let it eat at her mind too much as she eats her snack and goes back to sleep. When she wakes up again, it is nighttime. There's food next to her that she immediately enjoys. Looking around, she does not see the man that has taken care of her. She moves a little, and the wound still aches. She begins to focus as she tries to use healing magic to fix herself. She realizes how bad the wound really was when she finds that she can't just heal it in a minute of concentration. She uses so much energy that, of course, she falls asleep again. The next morning, there is once again food and fresh water waiting for her. She looks and finds that she has fresh bandages on her. This time, brushing her hair doesn't hurt. She walks to the door and looks outside. The house is only about 50 feet inside the woodline. She can see a field with wheat waving in the breeze. After a few seconds, she hears something. Looking over, she can see the man splitting logs. He isn't wearing a shirt, and his body is covered in sweat. He notices her for a moment and then goes back to what he was doing. She walks over to him and notices the large pile of wood that he's made. The elf says, I never did ask your name. She doesn't get a response. I am Rihanna. Still no response. Did I say something wrong? The man responds, no. It's just that I haven't had a name in almost 2 years. How does one lose their name? She inquires. It's not that I lost it, it's that I have no use for one, because I have no need for one. Rihanna, I'm not sure I understand. Reassuringly, he says, don't worry about it. If I do need a name, call me John. Rihanna asks, all right, John, I have another question. What are you expecting in return for your assistance? He simply states, your silence. What? She asks. I do not want you to tell anyone that I'm here. She says, if that's all you wanted, then you could have just left me on the battlefield. He says, perhaps, but I still have my humanity. Rihanna leaves him alone to contemplate his answer. She finishes her breakfast and pulls her hair behind her into a ponytail and lies back down. For dinner, Rihanna again eats very well. In fact, she gets seconds. She asks, so what are we eating anyway? John says, if I told you, you'd never eat it. Rihanna only pauses for a second, then she goes back to eating. By the morning, she has healed herself. She dresses herself in the same clothes she had when she was injured. She goes out with John as he goes foraging again. With two people, it doesn't take long before they must empty their buckets. That night, John teaches Rihanna how to cook food. The food stocks continue to grow, and Rihanna doesn't complain since she is eating better than she ever has. While searching for food, they hear the sounds of battle off in the distance. It's obvious a long way off. There is sound of artillery and heavy machine guns. By the time they reach the noise, the battle is over. There are creature bodies everywhere. Broken equipment, empty shell casings are all left behind. Rihanna, goblins. I've never seen so many of them before. Looking around a demolished Humvee, it looks like your people have been getting better. Then John says, not just mine. Rihanna walks over and finds the remains of goblins killed by fire and ice. They look at each other and John begins to look over everything for something he can use. Finding nothing, he begins to cut off parts of the dead goblins. Rihanna, what are you doing? Getting what we need to survive, he said. You mean you're going to eat that?" she asks. He responds, "Not just me." Rena responded with, "I won't eat goblins." John, trying to stifle a laugh, "What do you think that's been filling your belly? These creatures, along with the others, have just kept us fed. Now hurry, the scavengers will be here soon." Rena was disgusted, but helped get the meat ready for transport. As they left, they could see that John was right. All sorts of scavengers began to show up and devour the remaining corpses. "We don't live in a world where you can be choosy about what you eat. Not anymore," he told her. The meat was preserved, minus what ended up on the menu that night. Rena almost had to force herself to eat, as she was disgusted at the idea. The next day, John led Rena down to the river. He didn't waste any time in stripping down and jumping in. Rena was just slightly apprehensive when they first reached the river, but as soon as John began to strip down without a care, she began to as well. They both enjoyed the bath. John got out and washed his clothes and then set them up to dry in the sun. Rena was just surprised to see the mechanical motions. She also took a good look at John's build and defined form. When she wasn't looking, John looked at her sleek and defined figure. That is, until John noticed that they were being watched. He made it seem as though he was simply done with his bath. Climbing out, he reached and grabbed his rifle he brought with him. A troll came out of the bushes, trying to quickly take John down. John could only get the rifle up as the troll's torso before it began to push him over. The troll's strong arm lifted John off the ground as it swung, and he landed against some trees as the troll flinched in pain. The bullet had pierced through the troll, and now it was bleeding out. John tried to reach the rifle to finish it off, but the troll knocked it away and lifted its massing arms, preparing to crush him. That is when a flash of fire enveloped the troll. It turned around to face Rihanna. John could see that the troll's entire back had been scorched with second and third degree burns. Some parts were even still on fire. John watched as Rena swelled up another fireball. This time, the entire troll was enveloped. It ran into the river with an attempt to put out the flames. As the troll drove in, Rihanna jumped onto the water with a large pile of stones. She spun off a rock and struck the back of the troll's neck with her foot. The troll's neck was broken, and the corpse slowly drifted down the river. This time, Rena stands over John, her body still glistening in the sunlight. John barely able to keep conscious and knowing he only has a few more seconds, and simply said one word: "Beautiful."